I think when you have loyal listeners to your podcast, it's much more valuable than just a standard CPM on a campaign, because those people watching, they're more than brand advocates and brand ambassadors. They are your hardcore fans. And I think for smart marketers, I think that gives you an opportunity to tap into niche audiences. For us and the values of which we want to build ID Studios on, inclusivity is a huge part of that. Go on YouTube now, look at some of the biggest creators in the world. It's people from all walks of life, all different challenges, all different sexualities, disabilities, anything like that. And for us to really kind of have the physical space that represents the ID Studios mantra, it was really important.
Having a kind of attitude of inclusivity obviously transcends physical access, and that I think for us is also something that is just so fundamental and so evident. Hello and welcome back to the Purple Goat podcast. Today we've got a very special episode because we are with Jordan from this very ID studio to talk about all things podcasting, all things ID Studio, and look into the future of media as well and what that looks like too. Jordan, thank you very much indeed for having us. Yeah.
Well, Dom, thanks very much for having me as well. Yeah, nice to be here.
Oh yeah, no, absolute pleasure. I'm very excited to kind of chat with you today. I think that ever since we were first in contact with one another, there seemed like a lot of like natural shared sentiment around what we do, the industry we're in, and obviously opportunities into the future. So I'm very excited to kind of pick your brain, hear about you, your journey, and then also look to the future in sort of what the industry might look like as well. Starting off then, would you mind just introing yourself, maybe obviously introing the studio and how that came to be?
Absolutely. So yeah, my name's Jordan. We're here at ID Studios, which is the studios of which I'm a co-founder of. So we opened the studio, I think 18 months ago now. We're based in London Fields on Mare Street, which kind of, for those people who don't know London Fields, it's very much like a creative hub. Like I'm sure when you guys come and visit, you're kind of seeing all the different people here, and it really is people from all walks of life and in all different industries. I remember when we originally looked round, we were looking at various different places to open the studio, and some of our team who were with us, they were kind of looking around and they were like, oh my God, that's this person and that's that person. And it was like some of the biggest YouTubers in the world were all working from this office right here. So we were like, okay, cool. We feel that kind of creative energy. That's really important for us, but also for our clients. And we decided to open the studios here. And yeah, outside of that, I've also co-founded a sports media agency. So yeah, it's certainly keeping me busy, Dom.
And what made you want to get into the kind of, I suppose, studio podcast space, as it were?
Good question. One of the premises and kind of the lines behind ID Studios, more a mantra than a line, is for creators by creators. So long before we ever even dreamed of opening up a studio, we used to produce our own podcast. So for sort of 8-9 years, I was a producer for podcasts, sort of as like a sort of side gig. And we've been across London, all the different studios. And it was just, we never found a single place that could cater for our needs and that could kind of provide us with a premium looking sort of studio and all great equipment and use of studio really easy. We couldn't find it. So we were fortunate enough when we formed our new business that we had some really great investors, shout out KHI, and we kind of told them the vision. And when we built this studio, like I look around this studio and I feel a lot of pride for how it is, but this was literally a blank canvas. So I was here rolling the floor out, you know, all the set that you can see and kind of the other side. We were literally, that was just blank pieces of wood that we literally we got set builders in, we built it all from scratch. And I think that kind of for creators, by creators is because we feel like we are our clients. We understand the needs and the wants of people who are looking to do a podcast. And we felt like that put us in a good position for people who are going to be able to host their own podcast and build their own studio.
And you, obviously, with that kind of mantra around creators, in the same sense, like we live and breathe creators all day, every day, what we do at Purple Goat. What is it about creators as a kind of community that you think offer something that you can't get elsewhere? What do creators offer brands, offer the general population that is hard to kind of get in other kind of realms of marketing?
I think the growth of of socials has allowed people to kind of foster and build these communities of like-minded individuals, people who share the same passion points or any kind of particular interests. And I think by being a creator who wants to kind of really build their audience and mobilize their audience, and that could be an individual YouTuber, or that could be like an agency such as yourselves, it allows you to actually speak directly to either your consumer or your fans or your followers. And I think it's so much more impactful to actually be able to kind of show yourself and to kind of share your beliefs and your visions, and that's going to build your audiences, which ultimately is paramount to a creator achieving any success, right? And for yourself, working with different brands and working with different influencers, we all know sometimes it's not just like social followings can be a vanity number. Just because someone might have 2 million followers, the level of engagement that they get might be nothing. The connection people feel might not be anything. So sometimes even if you've got a smaller audience, but that audience will really believe you and go on that journey with you, then I think that's being able to harness that is really valuable.
And so therefore, like podcasting and studio sort of what I'll call high production content, such as what you can do here, what has that offered to creators? Like, what does that offer to the creators that walk in the studio? And what are they able to achieve through that type of content opposed to what we might say UGC content?
I guess just before we started rolling, we were having a really good conversation about this. So I would almost put it back to you, Dom, and kind of for Purple Goat's perspective, what have you got out of using the studio comparatively with not?
Good twist of events there. Very honestly, I think that, of course, both have a time and a place. And largely speaking, I think that for us, we love like the sort of vehicle of the podcast to have a more nuanced conversation, often to have a very informal conversation and get under the skin of something like in a really kind of effective way. So often we talk about things, particularly in the world of inclusion, as not being black and white and not being like, oh, you can't just kind of summarize everything that you want to talk about in 20-second reel or a 30-second reel. So actually, in that sense, the vehicle of the podcast is wonderful because we can show the actual personality behind individuals, the nuance behind a conversation, the different sides of an argument, or not an argument, but a conversation. And so that's, in that sense, brilliant. You've also got the very kind of media-focused sort of value of it. And we do a 20-minute, half-hour, 40-minute podcast, and then we can chop that up into social assets. So we'll do reels, we'll do shorts, we'll do stills even sometimes, and all of that, we can put out for in either trailing content that we're about to do, or afterwards, giving it a kind of second life or even third life across different platforms, and it's just extremely valuable for us to be able to do that. And more than anything, our content has to practice what we preach to our clients, and obviously to our community. But we want our content to feel professional. We want it to feel interesting. We want it to be thought leadership, I suppose, because we want to carry that progressive conversation around both disability inclusion, but also just broadly inclusive marketing. We know that we're kind of leading the way with that regard, in many spheres of society, and so therefore it's really important for us that actually we're practicing what we preach and producing that best-in-class content.
100%, and I think you sort of said as well prior to us starting the cameras rolling that you can kind of showcase potential clients the actual work you create for Purple Goat, and it's kind of like, hey guys, look, here it is, here's us doing it.
Yeah, if we can't sort of showcase what we're telling them to do and to invest in, and we're not practicing what we preach and saying like, hey, this is the best kind of thing to get you ingratiated with a certain community or to get under the skin of a certain kind of conversation or whatever it might be, and we're not kind of doing that ourselves, I think that would look a bit strange. And
100%.
And we are like so passionate about the value of crafting what I call both engaging but also to an extent educational content that really just builds a confidence in our audience. And we still have to build that confidence in our clients, particularly if we're, again, doing this kind of inclusive first stuff, because we know it's new to them. We know it's different. But when we kind of sit in a studio like this, we, propose media that is familiar to them, suddenly we're kind of taking away that fear. We're taking away that, I suppose, worry that disability is going to look a certain way. And absolutely, it's going to have total parity to what they're doing elsewhere. And actually, we know it's going to outperform what they're doing elsewhere because inclusive narratives just do really work. So actually, us being able to showcase what we do actually has so much value for us.
It makes me very happy as the co-founder of the studios to hear that.
and I think for you, it'd be lovely to kind of sort of hear a bit about the different types of clients you have in here and how that's changed over time, and then also how you're imagining that moving into the future.
So I guess one of the best things about ID Studios, and probably any podcast studio up and down the country, not that there are that many, is when you think podcasting, like if I said podcasting, what would you picture? Who do you think of when you think of podcasting?
Well, that's a good question. I think of Stephen Bartlett or someone like that, I suppose, because that now is just such a sort of, household sort of podcast that everyone sees somewhere, and they have heard these stories about certain people that he's interviewing. I think that's obviously very British, but you've obviously got your Joe Rogans and whatever that have just transcended something that would typically be like a sort of infomercial podcast and have just become absolute mass media.
Yeah, and mass media is the right term for that. And I guess that's kind of interesting because you kind of got that spectrum of podcasters, like these kind of global sort of thought leaders, mass audiences, huge influence. And then you've kind of got all the spectrum. So like you were talking about from a Purple Goat perspective, you've got agencies, PR agencies, production agencies, marketing agencies, advertising agencies, all coming in and producing, like, again, let's say Purple Goat perspective, you've got B2C content that you're putting out, but you've also kind of got the B2B content that you're creating as well. You have, as we're looking at the other side of the studio, we've got the broadcast suite for the people watching on the cameras behind us, and that's our second set. And it's currently adorning many hipster and expensive football shirts and the flags of all the different Euros countries. So we've got a football podcast who come in and they record live every day. We've got Formula E, they come in. So we had the Formula E champion. He was in recently, so that was nice to meet him. We've had some of the biggest rappers in the UK. We've had people like Kano in. I just got back from Glastonbury, where I saw Mr. Mike Skinner.
Yeah.
And it was very cool. We had Mike in the studio.
Amazing. I met him once at a festival in Denmark, and it was the best. Genuinely, to this day, I would say it's the best gig I've ever been to.
Oh, really?
It was a streets gig.
Yeah.
At Roskilde Festival.
Very cool.
He just had 80,000 people in the palm of his hand.
Yeah.
And it was just unbelievable to see that kind of ability to work a crowd in that way. It was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Absolutely phenomenal.
I can confirm he was phenomenal at Glasgow as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you get such a broad spectrum of people who come into the studio, and I would say big shout out to Garode, who's our main studio engineer here. He is always working in the studio tirelessly. He sees more celebrities than probably anyone else in London because it's like a conveyor belt of interesting different people who come through. So he's in the hot seat there welcoming them in. But yeah, it's brilliant. It keeps things super exciting. And then you also kind of go down to people who are starting out their podcasting journey. So, I mean, we've worked with so many different people, and even in terms of ideation of their podcast. So we've been working with a professional boxer, a world champion called Chris Billam-Smith, who's kind of sort of a growing name, but big enough to have headlined a couple of football stadiums. He came to us with a concept, and he said, listen, I want to have this whole podcast kind of based on that 1% of that, push yourself to that 1%. To really maximize your performance. It's kind of his mantra, CBS, consistency builds success. And we basically ideated how he could leverage his brand and his audience and put it into a digestible kind of podcast and how he could grow his audience like that. So yeah, lots of different people.
Amazing. And looking towards the future, what do you see for the industry? Like, do you think that we're getting to a point of saturation, or do you think that it's just going to continue sort of growing and growing and growing as an industry?
I don't think, from a UK perspective, I don't think we've scratched the surface. When you look at how the podcasting industry operates in the US, it is night and day compared to the UK. I mean, just the scale of it. Obviously, you've got big audiences there, so there's much more marketing dollars over there. But I even think in terms of the way, there's the London podcast show, which I don't know if you've ever been to before, but it's really interesting. You kind of get your big behemoths, your Acasts, etc. down, and Louis Theroux was there last year. And that's really inspiring when you go to an event like that, because you feel like you can see this community coming together, and you can also see the scale of it. I think when you look at the development of social media platforms, like even like YouTube, for example, having a specified podcast set, obviously Spotify bringing in video, it's never been more important to have cameras kind of rolling as well. Obviously, when you're looking to kind of cross-pollinate your content across different platforms, it's essential. So I do just see it growing and growing and growing. I mean, TikTok, God, it's dangerous when you get on TikTok. You get on there and I mean, time moves very fast when you're on TikTok.
Yeah, doom scrolling for hours.
Deep scrolling for a long time. But how often do you scroll through there and you see clips from podcasts that you've never seen or heard of before?
And that starts you on your journey.
And I think there's a long way to go, because don't get me wrong, it's not easy to monetize a podcast. Now, you're seeing it more and more. There's certain brands who will kind of do different deals with the major publishers, etc., and you'll sort of get a blanket CPM. But it's really evolving now. And I think when you have loyal listeners to your podcast, that's, it's much more valuable than just a standard CPM on a campaign, because those people watching, they're more than brand advocates and brand ambassadors. They are your hardcore fans. And I think for smart marketers, I think that gives you an opportunity to tap into niche audiences. And I think because of that, because of the ROI people will get on that, I think you'll see more money coming into the industry. That paired with the development of social platforms, I think it will kind of all rise up together. And I think ease as well. If you wanted to start a podcast 10 years ago, it's quite difficult to do it. And now you can kind of, I wouldn't recommend doing it on Zoom, come to ID Studios, but you can do it for the free if you want to. And that's okay as well. So onwards and upwards, I hope, but I also see.
You sort of mentioned briefly there around kind of the financial opportunities, but also obviously some kind of, barriers to podcasting as a sort of money-making thing for some people. What would your top tips be for aspiring creators in terms of, like, they want podcasting to be a big sort of remit of their content, they'd love that to sort of pay for itself and monetize for them? What would be your top tips based on what you see that works best in terms of how they approach it?
Patience and consistency. That is what I would say, because it takes time to build an audience. So just because you might have a pre-existing audience on one platform doesn't mean you can always translate that into an audience on another platform. So it will take time. And I would also say you want to do something that you really care about, because if you're going to be the person sitting there talking about it week in, week out with that consistency, if you're not interested, your viewer knows that. So you have to really live it and breathe it. And I think if you want to do it for a money-making kind of scheme or a revenue driver, there's easier ways to make money. But once you do crack it, then I think kind of the possibilities are endless.
Yeah. And the ability to then branch out and differentiate revenue streams from there can be, like, also very lucrative as well.
Yeah, 100%.
In terms of you as a businessman, you look into the future, what are your aspirations for ID Studio and beyond?
I think I kind of alluded to it at the top of the podcast, but podcast studios in London are fairly few and far between. The big differentiator we wanted to have at London ID Studios within London was to have that industry-leading equipment. So it was all about providing a premium service. So you come into the building, it's a really lovely building, there's a great cafe downstairs. You come into the actual studio and kind of we've tried to design it as nicely as possible. We've taken a lot of different support, and we want to have a set on camera that looks amazing. And that was one of the things we always found. It was kind of sofa plonked in front of wall. We didn't want to do that. Like these windows, for example, this was a very last minute change before we opened the studios that ended up delaying the opening of the studios by about a month, because we were originally having the lounge set was going to be on that back wall, but I didn't want to lose the brick. So we built these custom flats. We filled this with LED lighting and then put these fake windows in so you could customize the color, put it to your branding, kind of, make it look personal. It's all about personalization. I'm going slightly off tangent there. But for the future of ID Studios is to open more studios. So I think what you're seeing is there's different cities, Manchester, Leeds, which are huge creative places. And I think what you're seeing is slowly, things like podcast studios are becoming more accessible and becoming more desirable. And I think for us, trying to be there to cater those needs at a competitive price point with industry-leading technology and the staff and the service to have a nice premium experience is exactly what we're there to do. So hopefully, we're only new, we're only young, but as we kind of build our audiences and kind of make sure we maintain that service, that would be the ambition for ID Studios.
Awesome. Good luck with it.
Thank you very much.
And I think kind of just to sort of, I suppose, sort of wrap things up to an extent, we obviously came to you because for us, the accessibility and inclusivity of the space is fundamentally important. I'm a wheelchair user, other members of the team are wheelchair users, so, physical access is one thing, but then it's does it have an accessible loo? Is there enough space? Does it have a lift? I mean, they sound like quite basic things, but you'd be amazed how few and far between those are for looking at sort of podcasting spaces, studio spaces in and around London and of course beyond. And I'm guessing that London will be best in class for that. And as you get further and far between, that isn't something that you see that often. I think that it would be great for, when we first spoke to you, you can tell when you meet someone that they get it and you just got it and understood that. Have you kind of had any sort of thinking in and around that when you were building the space, or is that just something that happened to be the way that things are as far as ID Studios is concerned, and is it something that you kind of hope to bring forward into the future as well?
I think, well, just to echo some of the things you said, yes, likewise, when we had our conversations, I was kind of really excited to work with yourself and work with your team. And I think when we looked, because we looked at a lot of buildings, a lot of different places for a studio. And for us, and the values of which we want to build ID Studios on, inclusivity is a huge part of that. Again, just to say, for creators, by creators. Go on YouTube now, look at some of the biggest creators in the world. It's people from all walks of life, all different challenges, all different sexualities, disabilities, anything like that. And for us to really kind of have the physical space that represents the ID Studios mantra, it was really important. And this studio as well, Mayor Street Studios, where we are, is a workspace building called Mayor Street Studios. And it's also one of the greenest buildings, sort of communal workspace buildings in London. So that kind of fit with us as well. Obviously, you're talking about the wheelchair access. We've got the lifts that just come straight up. There's no stairs really here. Super important. And I think as we kind of grow and look to other destinations, etc., absolutely. And with podcasting, there is, like I said before, there's so many different people. And it's all the guests that different people have, you have to really be able to think about things like that in order to try and build a sustainable business.
I mean, it sounds sort of so fundamental, but we obviously just have to look through the lens of, well, we could have anyone come as a guest, and we know that their needs are going to be diverse. So therefore, we know that we therefore need a studio that can accommodate a diversity of sort of people's needs, but at the same time also have that attitude to sort of try and be helpful to that as well. We know that it's not one size fits all. It's not everyone kind of needs that one thing and that's it. Having a kind of attitude of inclusivity obviously transcends physical access, and that I think for us is also something that is just so fundamental and so evident with you guys as well. Just it's if we came to you with a specific kind of ask or a specific request, I know that there's an opportunity that we could try and work that out. We'll do our damnedest to make it happen. And that is so refreshing because, again, it's not something that you see every day, that you still do get that kind of computer says no attitude sometimes. And it's so nice when you work with people and collaborate with people where actually it's like, no, we'll make it happen and do it. And that's really, really fun.
Well, it's lovely to hear that. So I appreciate that. Thank you. And again, I shouted him out earlier, but shout out to Garode because he's an absolute cornerstone of this business. So yeah, a lot of your comms are with him. So yeah.
The other had 2 shout outs in one podcast, Garode. Well, there you go. Well,
his mum slipped me 50 quid before we came on.
No, I echo that absolutely. Honestly, thank you so much for all your support of the Purple Gate podcast. I'm obviously very excited as to where our relationship will go into the future and what we can do together. I'm sure there's a load of exciting stuff on the horizon. The very best of luck with everything. Is there anything you'd kind of like to end on to our audience? Anything you'd like to say?
Nothing jumping out at me, but yeah, Dom, thanks very much. I was looking forward to our conversation today. Every time we've spoken before, I've found it really interesting, and I really respect what Purple Goat are doing, and I think how you do it is so fantastic as well. I think your team has been lovely, Carmen. So it's been nice to get to know yourself and your team. And yeah, if you are looking to book your podcast, ID Studios, we're only 8 minutes from Liverpool Street.
Awesome. Great plug at the end.
Thank you.
Have a lovely day. Thanks, mate.
Thank you very much.
Speak to you soon.